Welcome to Hardspace Shipbreaker. This is an early access game I've been keeping my eye on. I've dropped about 50 hours into it, and I'll probably drop another 50. It is really interesting because it is a genre I've never seen before. It deserves a video, so here's the video. Let's talk about it. What exactly is this game? Well, you play as a salvager. You buy up derelict ships and you try and make money by tearing them apart. In this case, we got these beautiful solar cells. Let's go ahead and rip those off and sell them to the highest bidder. Just zap, and then down you go. Woo! Now, why is this game different from something like Cleanup Crew, which you think would be kind of similar? Well, it turns out that this game is secretly a roguelike metroidvania with player-driven metroidvania progression. Yeah, kind of sounds imposing. I've never seen this before, so let's talk about it. Let's talk about why this is so interesting. And the reason it's interesting is because your randomly generated dungeon, a spaceship in this case, is something that you're going to pass through dozens of times, each time with different objectives that you yourself made up and with different kinds of access that you yourself created. So your first pass is probably going to be to look at the outside of the ship, where you're going to be like, okay, well, I can salvage these. We could. It would take some time, so I'm not going to. But we could rip off all these solar panels, and then we could rip off the sensor boy here, and there's probably another one on the other side. Low-hanging fruit for your first pass. Oh, look, here's some real low-hanging fruit. An antenna. You can just pull those straight off, so why not? These other ones have cutter requirements. You have to actually sever them using a heat gun. So we'll leave those for later. I'm not trying to show you a good playthrough of the game. I'm just showing you some of the unique aspects of it. But once you've finished with your run-through of this particular part of the dungeon, you move to a different part of the dungeon. So let's head inside, because we can't get at most of the goodies from outside. That's how spaceships are made. You don't attach delicate things to the outside. They tend to get hit by meteors.
Airlock pressure levels increasing.
So once we're inside the ship, our perspective is different. We are in a different dungeon. It's contained within the dungeon that we were just looking at. It's contained within the outer hull. Technically speaking, it's actually contained within the thing that's contained within the outer hull, which we'll get to in a little bit. But this dungeon, we walk through it with different priorities. We're looking for low-hanging fruit and for mission-critical objectives. But not every mission-critical objective is currently a mission-critical objective. For example, this is the cooling unit. The cooling unit is very important. And we could fuss with it right now. But if we did, the reactor would explode. We're not quite ready for that yet. So we're going to leave the cooling unit and make a note of where it is as we continue to look for other things we might want. One of the other things we definitely want is down here on this end. This is a fairly small ship, so these things are pretty easy to find. This is the fuel dump. Let's go ahead and vent the fuel. That should radically lower the amount of exploding we do. Hooray! There are doors. Of course, it's a dungeon. There are always doors, right? Should we just open these doors? Are there keys we need to find? How do the doors matter? Well, this is the clever bit, because some of these spaces are pressurized and some of these spaces are depressurized. So our first pass through this dungeon is to get everything depressurized, which we could do just by willy-nilly opening doors, except that if you open a pressurized door into an unpressurized space, all of the stuff is going to go flying into that unpressurized space, and everything is going to explode. There are some ships that are set up specifically so that the reactor is directly across from a pressurized cargo bay. So if you open the cargo bay, all of the boxes fly out and directly hit the reactor, and the whole ship explodes, because the devs are a little bit mean. If we hit T, we can see the pressurization status. This crew quarters is red, so it's depressurized. We're in a green space. You can also tell because down in the corner it says pressurized, and because there's little floating air bits. So if we were to open this door, everything in here would go flying into the crew chambers, which wouldn't be catastrophic. There's really nothing in the crew chambers we care about, but it makes more sense for us to simply toggle the state of this room.
Level decreasing.
Now that this room matches that room, the door opens and we can continue our sweep. So in here, we're going to want to pick up all of the easy-to-access goodies. It doesn't look like there are very many in this particular ship, but we might come back here for some of this stuff. This battery pack is one of the things I need for my next level up, so we're definitely going to keep an eye out for that. We're also going to grab any low-hanging fruit like these data drives. Now we're trying to get everything to a depressurized state, so we don't need to toggle anything in here. It's all fine. Right now everything is hunky-dory. It's just like how we want it to be. This is an airlock. We can toggle it just by toggling it.
Pressure levels dropping.
But over here we've got another door. Oh, look at these are all pressurized rooms. It's the cockpit. There might be some stuff in there floating around. If we wanted to play it safe, we would go and we'd repressurize this room. We'd go into the cockpit, we'd scour it clean, we'd make sure there was not going to be anything flying around. But we're on a timer here. Ah, there goes some stuff.
Air pressure level decreasing.
Not too bad, just one thing. That's fine. Let's go grab it. It's a data drive. Now the entire interior of the ship is depressurized, which means that we are ready to move on to the next phase of our operation, which is to start to take the ship apart. We do that by moving into the intermediate area, the area between the pressure hull and the outer hull. This is like a whole separate dungeon. It's got lots of things to keep an eye out for, lots of things that you're going to want to look for, lots of low-hanging fruit, and what's considered low-hanging fruit will vary depending on what you've done. For example, these coolant tanks are wonderful, easy-to-get, expensive objects that you can just load your barge down with. But you can't really get them to your barge yet because there's a lot of hull in the way. So for a first pass item, they're not really very attractive. Maybe for a second pass item once we started to rip the hull apart. These green barriers here, these are things where we can't cut them. These are elements that we have to shatter before we can cut them. So what we can do to shatter them is grab something like these lights that we don't care about, and then we'll just kapow. Can we grab you again? Grab. And kapow. But that's not the only thing we can do with these. The reason that these are high priority right now is because if you can't find something to shoot at them, you can just light them on fire. The fire will burn for about 3 minutes, and it's perfectly safe as long as you don't walk into it. Oh look, we found some fuses. Fuses are critical to powering down the ship safely, but of course you have to do it when they're not red, because if they're red, you'll get shocked. There's usually 3 fuses on a ship this size, so we'll keep our eye open for the other fuse. Back here we've got engines. We've got 2 different kinds of engines. We've got these columnar engines, the rear-facing engines, and we've also got the maneuvering thrusters. All of these can be just grabbed right now if we're in the mood to grab some low-hanging fruit before we start to cut away the hull. We can do it in any order we want, whatever we think is easiest. But in this case, let's go ahead and pull this engine out and send it down to the barge. Goodbye. Oh! That's not an engine. That is, in fact, a sensor boom. So that's fine. Both of them go to the barge. The only problem is that that one actually has 2 things on it, and I probably should detach the other one. We didn't do the full exterior run, so our exterior is a little bit iffy, but that's fine. Now the engines, the columnar engines, the rear-facing engines, we could try to remove them by opening up this entire hull area, or we could just rip them out through the back. These engine plates are pretty nice in terms of just basic salvage. We can toss them down into the processor and get ourselves some cash. The processor is that blue chamber past the red chamber.
Valuable
And then we have direct access to these engines. Here's the thing. If we hadn't purged the fuel, we wouldn't be able to do this. We would have had to get them out in a different way. So it really matters how you approach these things. And there's nothing wrong with not purging the fuel. It's a $50,000 key, after all. But because we did purge the fuel, we have a really easy job. We can go back outside and get these engines from there. Otherwise, we would have had to do some major surgery and maybe risked the reactor exploding. So there's so many ways to approach how you are going to be handling the spaces that you're working with. In this case, let's go ahead and start to cut apart some hull, and you'll get a real sense of how radically you can alter the shape of these dungeons. Because the whole point I'm trying to get to is that this metroidvania is powered by you. The game doesn't give you jumping shoes or anything like that. You're the one that decides what order to take things apart in, and you're the one that gets to feel the consequences of that particular decision. In this case, I'm trying to cut apart this hull. On these science vessels, the hull is a little bit stingy. I think there is, I would call it a glitch, where it doesn't properly detach until you have done an amazing amount of surgery. But, you know, it is what it is. I've switched over to this bad boy because there's no longer anything I could hit. On the other side, there were some pipes that if I'd hit, then there would have been an explosion, and I didn't really want to explode yet. So we're just cutting apart all of these pieces. So over there you can see a piece of the hull that looks different. Watch this. You can see that I've cut through it. The different pieces of hull have different resistances, and some pieces like this you can just cut through, which can give you real quick access to the outside world. And you can sort of get a sense of what we're doing. What we are doing here is we are completely changing the topology of the dungeon to give us better access to different parts of the area, different parts of the dungeon. We're going to cut these solar panels off now because otherwise they will go flying into the processor, which isn't really what we want. Although I guess we're just... It's one of those things where it's not going to matter because it's just for a video, so I'm not actually saving this, but just in general. You don't want to pass up on some free money. So, you know, free money. Now that we've pulled those off, we can send these bad boys over to the processor.
Salvage secured. Credits deposited.
Go! And you can see that we've really started to open up the ship. We now have a lot of access to the interior of the ship if we want it. But maybe we do, maybe we don't. So these spaces here, these are gates to the interior of the ship, and we can cut through them using this cutter, or we could burn them away using the burner. The burner is a little bit better in this case, so we're going to just go ahead and zap our way in, just to show you what it's like. There we go. Oof.
Salvage destroyed.
So I've just burned away that panel, which is why the AI is whining. She doesn't particularly like me destroying panels. But we now have direct access to this interior space. Remember this? This is the very first interior space we worked with. And we're back inside. Normally, you'd want to go in through the bottom because then you have direct barge access, but we happened to take the top off first, and I didn't want to spend too much time fussing around. So I thought I would show you. Now that we have access to that interior space, it's pretty trivial for us to grab any sort of expensive things we want from the inside and toss them down onto the barge. Generally, you'll want to have better aim than that, though.
Salvage secured. Account credit applied.
So you can see how the dungeon develops over time, and it's all driven by you. The player is the one making all the decisions about how the dungeon should be approached, what pieces should change. You can sort of think of it like all the best parts of the Zelda water dungeons without all the annoying parts of the Zelda water dungeons. It's very clean and crisp because at the end of the day, you're aiming for nothing. The ending is nothing. You want to scrap the entire ship. Now, in truth, when you're in a normal play mode, you're not going to be able to do that. You have a timer, you have a lot of oxygen constraints and stuff like that. But you do want to find an efficient way to cut apart the ship to get at the pieces you want to get at. Remember how I said that these coolant tanks were hard to find because they were, inside the hull so much, so our first pass wouldn't be able to really do anything with them? Well, we're on our second pass now, so we can grab them. See?
Salvage secured.
And that's why I love this game. It's a situation I've never really seen in this way, where you are deconstructing a dungeon as you see fit. I really, really like it. And if you have any interest in this sort of game, I recommend that you go try it out as well. Now that we've shown you all the serious stuff, let's go ahead and blow up a reactor. Just because, right? It's fun. So there are a couple of ways to blow up the reactor. Probably the easiest way is to disable the cooling. So we're just going to rip the cooling off of the wall here. And you can see how it now says reactor on the left. They're like, yeah, you screwed up. You took out the reactor's coolant. It's not happy. It's going to take a while for the reactor to actually explode, though, because they want to give you enough time to realize your mistake and try and right it. We actually can't get the reactor out yet because we haven't cut away enough of the outer hull. We could try to and get it out, but to be honest, it's not going to work. What we can do, however, is try and burn away enough of the hull that we can get at the reactor and poke it. Just because that's fun. Come on.
Warning. Cutting tool overloads are dangerous and can generate excessive paperwork for senior management.
Why is this panel so thoroughly... There we are. Well, that took a while.
Salvage destroyed. Please refrain from damaging salvage.
There's our reactor. You can pull it out of the ship. Holy crap. I can't believe I got it out of the ship. Oops!
Electrical damage. Health levels are low. Lynx recommends a healthy lifestyle to maximize productivity.
Am I actually going to have salvaged this? I actually didn't make it explode. I salvaged it instead. Well, I learned something new about these science vessels. You can actually salvage the reactor through a single plate. And it was one of those soft plates. We could have cut apart the hull really, really easily and just rip the reactor straight out in like 2 minutes. So if I was playing a timed game, that's how I would approach it. Anyway, I hope you've enjoyed this look at Shipbreaker. I strongly endorse this game. If you have any sort of interest in this sort of gameplay. Thank you. Have a good one.